Hello and welcome to the Voice of Supply Chain, brought to you by ISM New Jersey. I'm your host, Katherine McCleery, and we are here to tell personal stories of people in supply chain doing extraordinary things. Today, I am so honored to welcome Anna McGovern, the founder and managing director of Pondview Consulting. Anna brings more than 35 years of experience across supply chain and procurement, including 23 years at Unilever. She's become a widely respected voice in supply chain and procurement. You're going to learn she's also a teacher, mentor, board member, and now an author. And I love her story. It's one of resilience, generosity, and transformation. And I can't wait for all of you to hear it. So without further ado, I will welcome Anna to the stage. Hi, Anna. Welcome.
Hi, Catherine. It's great to see you. It's good to be here.
I'm so glad you're here. We've known each other for a few years now, and I feel like this is a long time coming
It
being on
has
the
been
show
a while.
together.
It's great to be with you. Yeah, I mean, we have known each other for a while, and Sarah Scudder is the connector among connectors, and I think that's how we got introduced. But
It is actually, and I think I met you for the first time in person at an ISM event last year, right?
that's correct. That's correct. Yes, we've known each other virtually, but we got to hug last year.
That's right. And it's full circle now. So I want to welcome everybody to the Voice of Supply Chain show. I know if you're just tuning in, you can obviously see we've got Anna on the show today. And as always, if you have comments, questions, just want to say hi, pop it in the chat. We will respond as they come through. She's got a lot to share with us today, so we're going to jump right in with a few of my favorite rapid fire questions. Anna,
Great.
describe yourself in 3 words.
Oh my goodness. Resilient would be the first one. Curious would be another one, and probably um, generous would be a third one.
Yes, agreed. And it always ends up that the way that people describe themselves in this first rapid fire. These are like the themes of what we're going to talk about today. So perfect.
Well, great.
Um, what's one thing people would be surprised to learn about you?
Ooh, one thing that they would be surprised. There was a time when I was a constant concert goer. I've probably have been to more than 200 concerts.
200.
Yeah, at least, if not more. Um,
Okay. Who's your
yeah,
favorite? What was the best show?
well, the best show ever, and now I'm dating myself, but back in the 90s, I saw Bruce Springsteen in the old MetLife Stadium. It was called the Meadowlands back then. He played for 4.5 hours. So that was probably the most incredible concert I'd ever been to. But more recently, believe it or not, 2 summers ago, I saw Rod Stewart with my husband and a couple of friends. The guy was 78 years old, and you should have seen the way he was prancing on that stage for 2.5 hours. He was incredible.
That
Just
man
one of
has
those,
endless energy.
he does. Incredible show. So that's probably a surprise. Most people don't know that. Another one is that I'm the daughter of immigrants. I was born in Syria. I came here as a young child. I don't think most people know that about me. I don't think about it. I don't talk about it. And you would never tell with a name like McGovern, but that's my married name. So, but
Well, what a perfect segue because I want to talk about your early life. You grew up in Connecticut, oldest child, obviously first generation Syrian American. Um, just what was that like being first generation?
yeah, it's funny to look back on it. When I think of how I grew up versus, what we do for the next generation. We always say that, the parents do better for their kids than were done to them by their parents. And my parents certainly did the best they could. I was the first member of my family to go away to school. And, to actually go to college and graduate from college. So that was like a huge milestone. But, what it was like, it was really a life of sacrifice for the most part. Certainly on my parents' part, they left everything that they knew and were comfortable with, and they came to start a life as grown-ups with 3 young children in another country. And my role since I was like 7 or 8 years old has been really about taking care of the family. Every decision I ever made in my life was, how am I going to take care of the family? And it started with literally translating for my parents at the age of 8 years old. I remember talking to SNET, which was the phone company before AT&T, translating about something with the phone bill at like 8 years old. So that's my first memory, and everything that had to do with just making sure I was there to help. And my dad ran a convenience store for 40 plus years. He worked until he was 84 years old, but he sold his business at the age of 73. So that work ethic and that family unit and being together and pulling for each other is really how I grew up. And honestly, I didn't realize until I was significantly older how hard it was for my parents and how poor they were. And we just never knew it because they really tried to make life as happy as they could for us. Even though my dad, was working 14-hour days, 7 days a week kind of a thing, he still was somehow present. And mom just pulled it all together for us. And I think a lot of my work ethic comes from them. And I just remember the first time I shared with them, I'm going to be working in New York City, in Manhattan. I thought they were going to pass out. This is when I started my career at Unilever, because to them, it was
That's the
far,
dream.
big. It was like, oh my God, is she going to be safe? And I just remember I took them, we took the train into Manhattan, and I showed them where I was going to work. And it was across the street, almost across the street from the Waldorf Astoria on Park Avenue. And it's like that pride that they had, like, oh my goodness, our sacrifice was worth it. And that's all they ever wanted, was to make sure that their kids had the opportunities that they themselves didn't have. So that's really what defined my childhood and early adult life, really.
So they instilled a great work ethic in you. And obviously, from a young age, you were stepping up and taking care of others. What were you doing? I'm sure not all of your moments were like that. As a kid, what were you doing when you weren't taking care of them?
Oh my gosh. So, back then, we lived in neighborhoods. There were no such things as play dates, or life was not orchestrated. We went to school, we went to parochial school, so we wore uniforms. We came home after school. The first thing we had to do was take off our uniforms. We did our homework, and then we went outside to play. Like we just went outside to play, and we grew up in a neighborhood where there were tons of kids to play with. We played things like run the bases, and we rode on our banana seat bikes with baseball cards, clothespin to those spokes so it would make noise when we rode. So it was just one of these things where everybody just came together, all the neighborhood kids, they played. You never knew who was going to yell at you or discipline you, or it was just one of these things where everybody was watching out for each other. And coming home, my mother never knew like how many kids were going to show up for dinner, because we always had a tag along, one or two friends, and she fed everybody. It didn't matter. We brought them home and they got fed. And then so that's what it was like growing up. It was really innocent in a way. We weren't overscheduled or over prescripted. It was just, I feel like it was a simpler life. But
Very
then again,
different time.
very different times. And certainly my kids didn't grow up that way. We did have the play dates and everything was scheduled. So, but it was a great childhood from that standpoint.
And you've mentioned to me before that food was a central figure in your childhood, and your mom was an incredible cook. Tell me about some of those experiences and the lessons that she handed down to you while you guys were in the kitchen together.
Wow, what a great question. Catherine, I think my next book, I mean, I've written my first supply chain book, but my next book is going to be called Lessons from the Kitchen. I've got this dream, and it'll be about not just the recipes that were handed down from my mother, but really, when you think about Mediterranean food or Middle Eastern food or like Lebanese, Syrian cuisine, you think of kebabs and tabbouleh and hummus and stuffing grape leaves. Rolling grape leaves is a chore, okay? It's not hard, it's just time consuming. And my mother first taught me to roll grape leaves when I was literally 8 years old. So during, the big feasts, the big holidays, Christmas, Thanksgiving, whatever it was, mom was the one that brought the family together. And I come from a very large family on both sides. So our house was, a house where everybody gathered. And she'd be cooking for 3 days, getting ready. And what would happen is I'd roll like this big pot of grape leaves for her. And we'd be sitting, and of course, I'm like held captive, sitting at the kitchen table rolling. And my mother would impart her life lessons on me. She'd describe the way she grew up. She was the youngest of 7 children, and she was like a late stage baby. And her parents grew up in World War I, believe it or not. And my parents were post World War II babies. And, what it was like to be poor and what it was like to be happy despite being poor, and the role of faith. Everything was about faith. Everything was about celebrating the religious holidays and, Saint this and
So
birthday
traditions.
that. Yeah, lots of traditions. And she definitely imparted, her moral code to me. you know she distilled it as we were rolling grape leaves, and it was all about telling me stories. It was all about storytelling. Now, I don't have a daughter, I've got 2 sons, but honestly, that tradition has carried out. My kids were really, really young. They were not even 2.5 and 1.5 when my mother passed away 20 years ago. And they've got a close connection to her, I think, because I've been able to pass along her stories, her traditions, her recipes. And I can't even hold a candle to my mother. Let's be clear about that in terms of her ability to cook and bake. I don't even bake. I love to cook, but nowhere near as good or as prolific as she was, with cooking. So, but honestly, that is a passion project that someday will be written on paper. Lessons from the kitchen. It'll be her recipes, her stories, that kind of thing.
We'll circle back with another interview when you've got your next book.
Thank
I
you.
want to take just a moment to say hello to the people that are passing in and logging into the call. Hi, Rebecca. Hello, Danielle. Thanks for joining us. And yeah, Green Bay representation, Florida. If you guys are watching, feel free to say hi. And if you have a question, put it in the chat and we'll be sure to answer. Um, one more thing about your childhood and going into your young adult life. You're in supply chain now, and that it was definitely a journey to get where
Mhm.
you're at. But you did not dream of being in supply chain. What was your dream, for your career when you're a child?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know that anybody does dream of being in supply chain, quite
Not
honestly.
yet.
Not,
Not yet. That's the
not yet.
future.
Right. No, honestly, what I wanted to be, I wanted to be a psychologist when I was growing up. I really thought I would, be a clinical psychologist. I majored in psychology in undergrad. And then the reality hit me as I was looking at, what am I going to do for money? And it just was one of these situations where, in order to earn any kind of a living, I had to go to school forever, and I would have had to go straight to graduate school and earn a PhD before I can even dream of making any kind of a living. And it just wasn't in the cards. The opportunity just wasn't there for me. So I decided, really halfway through school, that I better have something to fall back on. And I started taking a bunch of marketing classes. And I really did love marketing. I loved the marketing classes. I liked the idea of being able to use psychology to influence consumer behavior. So I think that is what attracted me to it. And then I graduated and I started looking for jobs. I had student loans to pay. I did have a scholarship, but there was no money left for expenses or anything like that. So I had a lot of student loans to pay off, and I wound up working in a manufacturing environment for an industrial plastics manufacturer as a customer service coordinator initially. And then I got into inside sales. And then from there, I got into operations. I worked in the factory as a materials planner and scheduler. And that was what launched my career in purchasing back then, it was called. So I kind of fell into supply chain. I landed in a company, started working, started earning money. I was making $26,000 a year back then. That was in 1987. And honestly, it was, I think what it was is that I just took pride in work. And that comes from my parents, right? That comes from my parents just having the freedom to work. Back in my mother's generation, women, Syrian women didn't leave the house and work. I think even as late as the 1990s, the statistic was below 20% of the women worked. And my mother took such pride. She worked in a factory, it's like sewing handbags, sewing, pocketbooks. And she took such pride in just going to work, right? And earning money for her family. And so I just took pride in the fact that I graduated college and I was working in a wonderful corporate city, Stamford, Connecticut at the time. And that was like a really nice place to be if you were going to work. And I just took pride in the work. And as a result, I think I started to fall in love with supply chain. And that got me recruited into Unilever, where I spent 23 years of my career. And, I never did get that PhD in psychology, but working at Unilever was like earning a PhD in supply chain. So there is a connection there somehow. But I mean, I didn't dream of being in supply chain. And, my kids often ask me, do you ever regret not being a PhD? Because I've shared this story, and because, being a doctor, of course, I was never going to be a medical doctor because I would have passed out from the blood. But being a doctor was like a sign of respect, to people like my parents, a sign of privilege, a sign of achievement. And I never did get it. I never did get a PhD. I do have an MBA, so I guess that's almost as good somehow. But honestly, I loved the career that I wound up working in. I was supported, I was rewarded. I had great mentors, and so I stayed in supply chain, and I have never looked back.
What was that first role in supply chain?
So the first role in supply chain was actually being a materials planner and a scheduler in the factory. That was the very first role. And then my first role at Unilever, I was a supply chain planner in laundry detergents. I was like, planning wonderful brands like All Detergent and Whisk, which I don't even know if they make whisk anymore because the brands got sold. So, and then I became, then I became the Dove girl. In fact, my AOL handle was Dove Girl, and I started planning. I was a supply chain planner on Dove, which is like, one of the premier global brands, for Unilever, Dove soap or Dove body wash. So that was my first corporate planning role outside of the factory.
What was the hardest part about being the supply chain planner for Dove?
Well, just being a supply chain planner, when I arrived, I had such imposter syndrome. Um, I got there and I felt really inadequate because I was among what I called the beautiful people, right? I was with people that had what I call designer degrees, the Harvards and the Dukes and the Wharton MBAs, and I'm working with these people. And I was like, I just don't fit in. They hired me, but they're going to realize I'm a fraud, with like a state, education. I didn't go to a good school or anything like this. And I would go home on the train every night, like feeling like I was going to throw up. I would be nauseated, thinking they're going to find out I'm a fraud. And then little by little, I started to realize, I've got common sense and I'm actually smart enough. I just need to believe that I'm smart enough. And those feelings started to go away. But I would say it didn't take me long. The smartest thing that I ever did for myself was not something I ever learned in college or from anybody else. It was just having the gut to ask for guidance. And if I can offer any advice to anybody, is ask for guidance and help and find mentors. I asked for help from somebody that I admired. We were at a social function for one of the leaders, and I just approached him with a question. The next morning, he showed up at my cube and he said, "Why don't you come to my office so we can talk about X, Y, and Z?" And that started this long process of asking for help and then being guided, along my career journey. And I think this is why I've loved supply chain and I've stayed in supply chain, is because people took an interest in helping me. I worked hard. I was recognized for it, but more importantly, I would ask for guidance and help, and I would get it. And that, I think, is probably my greatest lesson in how I've been able to have a successful journey. I certainly, wasn't like a golden child, anointed, and I wasn't going to be the one that was being, the superstar or whatever. I just worked hard and asked for help when I needed it.
So do you think that, part of why you loved supply chain was because you could learn so much and that part of you was satiated, there was always more? Because when I look at the landscape of supply chain, it is so vast and it is so broad, and there's
Yeah.
also an incredible depth to it. So for someone going into supply chain,
Yeah.
as a new, even now, like, what would you tell that person, a curious person that wants to grow in their career?
Yeah. So if you're going to enter supply chain, it is vast. It would be like saying, I need to go see a doctor, but you wouldn't, if you've got a heart ailment, you're not going to go to a dentist or something like this. So there are so many different areas of supply chain. And, we always break things down into the supply chain highway: plan, source, make, and deliver. I would say, anything you can do to get experience in each of those verticals is going to help you in your career. And along, 30 plus years, 35 plus years, every part of the supply chain has been the sexy part of the supply chain at different points in time, right? So, for example, when I first started, planning was the sexy part of the supply chain. How are we going to plan along the lines of demand planning and supply planning and production planning, et cetera. After a while, it was like, how are we going to do lean manufacturing, and how are we going to do TPM and find efficiencies in production? After COVID, I mean, I first got into real procurement through Unilever in 2001. And we were doing supplier partnerships and, creating value out of the procurement function 20 years before it became the sexy way to talk about procurement. But procurement came into the mainstream post-COVID, right? Because what we learned post-COVID is that inventory can hide a lot of sins. And when we run out of inventory, suddenly we need to rely on the ecosystem that includes our supplier partners to bail us out, right? And I've written a book on anti-fragile supply chains, and the 3 R's that I always talk about, which rely on suppliers, are you need to first of all recover as quickly as possible, or respond rather. You need to respond to a disruption. Then you need to recover from the disruption. And then you need to renew how you go about mitigating against disruption. So those are the 3 R's. You basically respond, recover, and renew. And it became really sexy all of a sudden to say, procurement is not about delivering cost savings. It's about generating total value within the supply chain. And then now, even now, like the logistics part of supply chain is the new sexy area to be in, because, as we talk tariffs and trade and, what are we going to do to reshore? What are we going to do to onshore? It becomes about redefining our networks, our supplier networks, our supply networks, our logistics networks. So logistically, how are we going to design our supply chain becomes an area of opportunity. So, my advice to somebody coming up is try each of those verticals and see what resonates, because to be truly impactful, you need to learn the end-to-end supply chain and find where your passion really is, because you have to have a basic appreciation across the board, but then find an area that really resonates with you, whether it's being in planning or being in strategic sourcing, and by the way, just to be in procurement, think of how many specialties you can have inside of procurement, because to purchase software from Microsoft is not the same thing as purchasing, plastics packaging, for direct materials. Completely different skill sets required there. Strategic influencing and stakeholder engagement. It really puts you at an advantage when you can talk the language of the business, and the language of the business changes depending on which category you're managing.
So you built up how many years in supply chain before you went to procurement?
So let's see, 2001, so 13 years. I was
Okay.
in manufacturing for 8, and then I was in planning for 6. And then I was told you need to move to a vertical. If you want to grow vertically, you need to move laterally. And I was given a choice. I could work in a factory or I can work in procurement. And I was like, all right, I'll try procurement. Just because in my mind, I was like, okay, well, I've spent 8 years in a factory. Let me try, this other animal. And oh man, that was the best move I could have ever made, because regardless of where I've been in my career, and half my career, like out of all the years in supply chain, half of my career has been in one manner or another of procurement, local, regional, global, on the strategic sourcing side, on the operations side of procurement. And the other half has been in end-to-end planning and supply chain. And every career success that I can point to has been associated with some kind of a supplier event, right? So it's always been about supplier collaboration that has led to success in my career, whether I was in procurement or not. Working with suppliers has led to success and ultimately led to different promotions for me. And it's all because we operate in an ecosystem where suppliers enable innovation, value creation, cost savings, opportunities. Suppliers do that. So, so this is why I'm very passionate about procurement, especially, and supplier relationships.
So I was going to ask you, like, who do you love more, supply chain or procurement? Choose a favorite.
Here I am. I've been like 4 years now doing my own business, right? So Pondview Consulting is an advisory and consulting practice in supply chain and procurement. Now, people who advise entrepreneurs will tell you have to niche, niche, niche. And I can't niche beyond, I've got two sides of my brain, the supply chain side and the procurement side. I can't give up one or the other, but the edge definitely goes to procurement because my passion is supplier relationship management, working with suppliers to enable growing the top line. And I define that through value, whether they're delivering innovation or they're delivering efficiencies, whatever it is, something, if they enable me through lower working capital or higher service levels, that's growing the top line, right? It's not just growing the bottom line, it's actually helping me to grow the top line. Because if I can launch faster a new project, a new product, because they've enabled me to launch faster, that means I'm in market longer and can start billing and shipping, right? And collecting sales. So the supplier relationship piece is probably like the ultimate of what drives me and where I want to always work, is working with suppliers somehow, right? So it's not just about negotiating contracts. It's about really negotiating win-win. And whoever tells you that if you're negotiating win-win, you're losing, I challenge that each day of the week, because there are people who think that if it's a win-win, you've lost the negotiation. And I don't subscribe to that at all.
Yeah, building the relationship is your win, and how you get there doesn't um to be someone losing
Yeah,
in the
exactly.
process.
Exactly.
Okay, so you figured out a lot of success in your career with supplier relationships and managing those, and allowing innovation to be the output. But I'm sure there were some, like, tough moments. Was there, like, a tipping point for you where you had to learn a hard lesson about supplier relations?
Oh, you just taught me about a moment. Yeah, so it was early on. I would say it was pretty early in my negotiations and in my working with commercial relationships with suppliers. I was responsible for plastics packaging at Unilever for all of North America. Um, and this is back when we were really starting to use data, right? What I learned early in my career is I'm not a poker player, right? I'm not going to negotiate based on, like wearing dark glasses. You're going to be able to read my body language immediately. I'm not going to lie. But what I learned early on is that my negotiations power was the power of data, right? So I learned to model should costs very early on, right? And I was able to understand the worth of an item instead of saying we're going to go with supplier A versus supplier B versus supplier C. I was able to strip out what the actual costs were and have a rough idea what a fair gross margin should be for the supplier. And I was also, at that point in my career, the only woman in these big negotiations, sitting in a room with like 15 to 20 men. And I had to come with the power of data. And I was visiting a supplier, a strategic supplier, in their facility, and we were negotiating, and I was basically telling them how off their pricing was on strategic components, right? And I'm saying this, and they wouldn't believe me. And the president of the division was in the room. He literally called me a liar in the middle of the conference room with all these people. It was the most humiliating feeling in the world. And, and this is where you lose faith. Like, oh my God, these people who have so much more experience than me. I lost faith in myself in that moment, thinking, maybe I'm wrong. And then I was like, but wait a minute, I'm not wrong. I know I've
You
done
have
my
you
work.
have facts, you have
I have
numbers.
And then I actually took out my laptop and I, blacked out certain things. And then I put the spreadsheet up on the board, on the screen. And I was like, here's how I've reversed engineered, the price. This is how far off you are. And then I started to go through the cost drivers one by one. And I was like, if this is this, these are the givens you've given me. These are my assumptions. This is the analysis. My assumption is that you've got another 20% before you actually are, getting to a right level. And you know what? He looked at this and he publicly apologized. Now, what's interesting is that person became the CEO of the next company that I worked in after Unilever, right? He actually created a job for me and hired me. After that moment, we had such an incredible relationship, such mutual respect for one another. And I really respected that he was humble enough to apologize, right? And it really created a much stronger bond between us so that I could count on them, okay, under his leadership, use that supplier and get to real value, because we just cut out, like, we got to the point where we achieved mutual trust, right? It's like we achieved mutual trust, and then we were able to do amazing things together after that. And then he actually gave me my next big role. I became a CPO after that, working on his portfolio. So it's a great story in terms of how you can use the power of data and stick to your guns when you've got the facts. Find your superpower, whatever it was. I didn't smoke cigars. I didn't play golf. And that's how deals were negotiated back in those days, and then now we've got so many more tools at our disposal. Things have definitely changed, and I'm glad they've changed for the better.
But the lesson remains that data, and I know it's everywhere, right? It's everybody's tagline, it's everybody's messaging, data driven decisions, right? Data driven XYZ. But when it comes down to it, that's really what you have
Mhm.
in negotiations. And you can either badger them or belittle and, force them into a price that nobody wants and risk the deal. Or you can play boys club and win them over, whatever it is. But none of that has survived, well, hopefully survived as long as data, right? And
And
so going forward, deals cannot happen without that foundation.
yeah, but one lesson I will say about data is don't get into analysis paralysis. One of the things that I was trained in and learned very early on is make decisions with 70% of the data, right? Lean in and make a decision, because speed is currency, right? You don't want to get to the nth degree. Get to that 70% mark, and chances are you're going to be right much more often than you're going to be incorrect, right? I don't want to say wrong, but you've got to lean in. You've got to make sure that you're taking decisions in a timely fashion.
That's such a good lesson. And there's so many tangents we could go into. And I feel like this is kind of what you were meant for, right? You've taught classes before,
Yeah.
and now writing a book, you are putting all of this incredible experience and real lessons um, into these wonderful resources. So I would love to just like have a moment where we can talk about transitioning from corporate, right, and managing people and process and having a leadership style there of I think the foundation for you is teaching and mentoring, but you actually did something with that, and you have lectured at universities. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I've actually taught. I was actually teaching supply chain to MBA students for a couple of years in my career, and now I continue to be a guest lecturer. My network. I'm blessed with an expanded network, and people invite me to talk about these topics. So um, supply chain is now in vogue, right? Obviously, it's something that is being taught in universities. It's such an incredible part of the supply chain, and I love to preach the gospel of supply chain. I really do, because there's nothing more satisfying than to know that you had a hand in making something, and teaching the lessons of bringing something to market. Like, in many companies where we make things, marketing usually is the sexy part of the organization because they come up with the ideas, or sales, are the ones that are selling the stuff. And the way I think about it is, sales and marketing make the promises that we in supply chain and procurement have to keep. Right. And so how you enable the business and the strategy is such a huge part of creating businesses. Right. I had an old professor back in business school who used to say, there are only three things you need in business. You need marketing, you need finance, and you need operations. He called it operations back then. And that's because you need somebody to come up with a product. You need somebody to tell you what it costs, and you need somebody to make it. Right? That's what it is. And you can't have a business without those three things. And so ensuring the concept of the ecosystem, right? If you think about a water bottle, and where it comes from, if you start to strip a water bottle or anything that we make, right? If I take this pen, and start talking about this pen, think of the many components that make up this pen. So the supply chain is just so ubiquitous. It is all around us. And then to be able to make something in a sustainable way, because sustainability is such a top of mind topic, and it has been for many, many years. That, how do I make this more sustainably? Or how do I make this in a way that's going to create positive impact in the environment? Or, how do I make tea? Or how do I make, an ice cream product where local farmers are going to work and having that dignity? You start to look at how supply chain touches every part of our lives. And then it becomes something that I can just talk about and teach, very profoundly, because it's coming from a place of authenticity. Yes, I'm teaching concepts, and I'm teaching principles, and I'm teaching actual processes, but I'm also teaching the why it's important. And that's what drives me about teaching and lecturing about the topic.
And what are you learning from your students, or what are you, gathering from these young, students that are curious about supply chain?
Well, so that's the part about teaching. No matter how much I teach, I'm learning 10 times more than I'm giving out in knowledge, right? I learn from these students, like their ideas, their curiosity, their ability to look at things differently. especially young people today, they've got a completely different avenue, in terms of how they're moving and how they're talking and how they're using technology and how they view the world, right? And so for me, it's a constant learning. I'm learning about new tools, new technologies. The one thing that I will say is critical is to never, ever, ever stop learning. You've got to be a student for life. You've got to embrace new ways of doing things, new technologies, new apps, new policies, processes. So for me, I'm always learning, and I have to stay relevant in order to deliver my message on point. So I'm constantly reading and updating and attending seminars and attending classes and listening to my colleagues. And LinkedIn is a huge place to learn, right? Because there are so many content creators out there that are teaching valuable things. There are so many classes that you can sign up for. So, I mean, that's my thing about teaching, is always be a student first while you're teaching.
What are you most excited about with the future of supply chain? This could be tech, this could be people, trends. What gets you excited?
You know what? I think supply chain has finally arrived, meaning when you look at the C-suite, first of all, like, we've had chief supply chain officers, chief procurement officers sitting at the table for a while now. But, when you look at who becomes CEO of a company, right, it's always somebody who has a marketing background or somebody who's got a general management background. They come from commercial or sales, or it's the CFO. And now what I'm starting to see, which is really heartening, I'm starting to see the supply chain rise to the top position. I'm also starting to see HR, right? So it's all about people. None of this can happen without people development, right? So I'm starting to see CSCOs and CHROs rise to the CEO level. And this is what gives me heart. This is what gives me hope that it is the right thing to do, is that companies are starting to appoint, supply chain to the top roles. And that's really exciting to see.
That the business values supply chain leadership so much
Yes,
more, and that
exactly.
they're a strategic impact to the bottom line, which, you know, you're right. Their time has come, and they certainly have arrived in a lot of companies, and procurement especially. I think needed that in the last few years. It's been
Yeah,
really cool to see that growth.
yeah. I mean, honestly, and this is probably a whole nother topic we can talk about for hours. Up until recently, procurement has gotten in its own way, right? And we need to see ourselves differently. I wrote a blog a couple of years back saying, procurement is no longer the bridesmaid. Procurement is now the bride. We need to not shy away from wearing that white dress and being the center of attention. So procurement needs to realize the impact that they have. And they can't convince others to see it unless they themselves believe it. And I think it's changing. It's definitely has changed. I see it every day with my clients. I mean, this is why I've remained so busy over the last 4 years delivering procurement models and how do we become more strategic in procurement, because they realize the C-suite knows that procurement and suppliers are a huge source of value delivery. So it is happening because I practice it. I live it every day. I know it's happening. And that's I give people the chance to think about that for a minute, and then really don't lose hope, because I know people are looking for roles right now. There's a lot of people looking, and I keep hearing that there aren't enough opportunities. There are lots of opportunities. Don't give up. Don't give up on the opportunities, because they're there. It's just things have gotten delayed because people have put things on hold because of the geopolitics and the tariffs and all of this, they've just put stuff on hold for a while. So things will be opening up in the second half. Have faith.
I love that. That's a good message. People need to hear that. And for those of you that are loving this this content and these lessons, because I can see in the comments, thank you, Bernice. That is so sweet. I It is amazing insight. You're right. And hello to Chetna as well. For those that want more, guess what? You can get more because Anna just wrote her first book. So tell us full title because you've got part of the title there.
Yeah,
Tell us the full title of your book, what it's about, and of course where people can find it.
sure. Thank you for that. The book is called Anti-Fragile Supply Chains, Building Resilience Through Better Strategy and Stronger Relationships. The heart of the book is how you deliver value through supplier relationships, essentially the ecosystem. And you can get it on Amazon. And basically, this is 3.5 decades worth of work and lessons learned. It's filled with examples and stories about the how, the what, the where, the when. And I would love for you to buy the book and, more importantly, to share your feedback about it. I've gotten comments that it's really easy. It's like a how-to guide. And that's how I meant it. I meant it to be a how-to guide. It's filled with, practical insights about how you can implement these ideas in your own practice. So, hopefully it continues to bring people some knowledge, and I'll write another one after this to see, what's next.
Would you ever consider doing like an online instruction of all of the chapters of your book?
Yeah, actually, I've been asked that. I hadn't thought about it. And, a lot of ideas come to me because people suggest them. So I'm good at listening to other people's ideas. So yeah, I actually have heard that from numerous people who've asked me to do that, and I will consider it for sure. I just need to find the time to do it, and I need to learn about how to do it.
Well, because you've taught, you've lectured, you've got all of this experience, you have a handbook. All we need now is an online format. I think you've got a winning combination, and I think you could help a lot of people.
Thank you. Yes, I believe you're right, and I just need to find the means to do that. If anybody in the audience knows how I go about doing that and can save me the time to research, please get in touch with me either on LinkedIn or DM me on LinkedIn. That's probably the best way.
So you've written this book and you're still going, right? You're a consultant, you
Yeah.
have a book of business, and you're still serving the supply chain industry and all of
Mhm.
the verticals within. How how do you envision your legacy? Like, I know you're still going, you're still in it, but
Yeah.
what do you want to leave behind?
Oh, what do I want to leave behind? I mean, honestly, the simple answer is I want to leave behind a world that's better than I found it. Right. And the only way I can think of doing that is by paying it forward. Right. People approach me, and I do need to be selective. Right. Only because my time is limited, but my passion is paying it forward and helping those that are coming up. I get inundated with requests. Will you be my mentor? Will you give me advice? Or will you do this and do that? The way I choose how I give my time away is when I can find somebody who's truly passionate about learning and who's truly passionate and authentic, in the way they go about living their life. And I can usually pick that out real quick. It's not somebody who's a taker. It's somebody who's a genuine giver, but knows how to ask for help in the right way. And those are the people that I usually prioritize, to help guide them along the way. And I basically impart their knowledge, my knowledge to them, and let them choose the means and the manner in which we're going to engage. I'll offer a segment of time and I'll say, I can give you 30 minutes here, 30 minutes there. It's up to them how they choose to engage with me. And that's my legacy, is let's pay it forward and let's help the next generation, do better in supply chain and in life. I mean, it's really like a subset of how I live my life. So
What are you most proud of as we look at all of these achievements, career, life? When someone if we were to pin a ribbon on you, what are you most proud of?
I mean, this is going to sound so cliche, right? It's going to sound so cliche, but it is the honest to goodness truth. Yesterday was my 25th wedding anniversary, and we have raised two incredible sons who are, the apple of our eyes. They are amazing human beings, and they both turned out to be engineers. My dad had a sixth grade education and was forced out, because he was the oldest boy of 10 children and he had to go to work at the age of 11. He could have been the best engineer in the world. He really dreamed that one of his kids could be engineers, and none of us chose that path. But his two grandkids, his two grandsons, I should say, are both engineers. And that is like my dad's dream of, coming to America, so to speak, came true. And not only have we made it as a couple, through commitment, but I've made it, as a successful supply chain practitioner, despite all of those feelings of wanting to throw up because I wasn't good enough and I didn't belong. I feel like I finally arrived, and I've got a long way to go. Okay, but at least I don't feel like I don't belong anymore.
I love how supply chain played such a big part in the enrichment of your life and your family, and has given you the purpose and a place for you to put your servant heart and the way that you want to um, enrich other people, because your life has
Yeah.
been so full. So, like, this has been so wonderful. I thank you for sharing so many details about your life and career today. I hope that everyone has enjoyed this as much as I have. I just am in awe of all of the things that you have accomplished, and um, clearly will still accomplish in the rest of your days, and focus on supply chain.
Thank you so much, Katherine. It's really my honor that you gave me this platform today. And I hope there's one person out there that was helped because of this discussion today.
Yeah, there was wisdom, there was practical advice, there were stories, like there was everything, a little bit of something for everyone. And for everybody watching, thank you for tuning in, whether it was for a few minutes in between meetings, or if you're watching back. And by the way, you can catch the replay here on LinkedIn, or you can check out the ISM New Jersey YouTube page. Thank you, Kathy Perna. She's in the background. She's the one that keeps this show going, and she will definitely post this video recording there. So while you're checking in on that, be sure to subscribe to the YouTube channel. And of course, again, thank you, Anna. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and hearing your story here on Voice of Supply Chain. Until next time, I'm Katherine McCleery, and I can't wait to bring you guys the next story. Next month will be Jose Bastillo, and I will see you then, everybody.
Thank you.